It is now time for oral questions. I recognize the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, on behalf of the official opposition, I also want to thank Cathy Seymour for the great work that she's done over so many years with her career here at the Queen's Park, as well as Blanca, the wonderful woman who is who's leaving us as well in her retirement, that cleans these offices and environs, and also the member for Ottawa Orleans, Ottawa Vanier, and Marie-France Lalonde as well as Madame Desrosiers. I think Ontarians would agree that service here is something that we value from all members, regardless of which political stripe they're from, and want to thank them for their service. Speaker, my first question is to the Premier. Yesterday, the Ford government announced yet another measure from the Premier's Cut First, Plan Later policy playbook, unilaterally legislating a salary cap on the women and men who teach our children, provide frontline health care, and make our province work every day. Can the Premier tell us why he didn't even try negotiating a collective agreement like virtually every other government in Canada does?
The question is to the Premier.
Through you, Mr. Speaker. When we took government and we looked at the books, we found out, surprise, surprise, there was a $15 billion deficit, $347 billion debt. That's on the backs of everyone in this room, backs on the young people up in the stands there, and we had to make a decision. I promised not one single person, frontline person, would lose their job. We're keeping that promise. We had a choice. We had a choice, unlike the NDP government under Bob Rae that took Bob Rae days. We made sure that no one's going to lose their job. So we had a choice. We had a choice of giving everyone 2, 3, 4% increase and laying off thousands of people, or everyone take an increase. Everyone's going to keep their job. They're going to get a pay increase.
Response.
And we decided to make sure that we went that route instead of the other route of laying people off that previous governments had to do. So we kept our promise. No one's losing their job, and everyone's getting a pay.
Thank you. Thank you. Stop the clock. Start the clock. Supplementary question.
Well, Speaker, now back to reality. Once again, what the Premier is really doing is deliberately picking fights and creating chaos, and Ontario families are the ones that are going to pay the price in their hospitals, in their communities, in their kids' classrooms. So the question is, can the Premier explain why he's opting for confrontation and court challenges when he could simply sit down and bargain, like virtually every other government across Canada does all the time?
Premier.
President of the Treasury.
Refer to the President of the Treasury.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, we're not picking a fight. We're supporting the frontline workers of all Ontarians. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think it's a good day when we protect the frontline jobs in this province. Mr. Speaker, I think it's a good day when we allow for increases on wages, Mr. Speaker. It is a good day when we keep our commitment to protect what matters most, making investments in health care, making investments in education, and putting this province on the sustainable path, Mr. Speaker. I would say that is a reasonable and fair and sustainable way to deal with our people, frontline workers in Ontario. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The final supplementary.
Well, Speaker, we don't think it's fair that the richest Ontarians got $300 million in tax cuts while everyday workers are being told they can't even negotiate a collective agreement. Families want a government that's helping them with their everyday lives, improving schools for their kids, cutting wait times for their health care, and instead they have a premier who deliberately creates conflict and chaos, conflict with high school students, conflict with seniors' book clubs, conflict with U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Now the premier's picking a fight with the women and men that teach our kids and care for us when we're ill. And it's families that will absolutely pay the price. Why is the Premier so desperate to attack the women and men who make Ontario work every day?
Question's been referred to the President of the Treasury Board.
That's just unbelievable.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let's set the record straight there. We did not do tax cuts for the richest in this country. You know who we did.
Order.
You know who we did do
Order.
tax cuts for, Mr. Speaker. You know who we're fighting for. We cut taxes for low individual and families in this province, Mr. Speaker. We're cutting expenses for those with young families who are on low income through the child care tax credit, Mr. Speaker. We're fighting for them. You know, we're fighting for seniors, low-income seniors, so they can afford dental plans, Mr. Speaker.
Too bad you voted against that. Voted against the seniors.
The only fight that we want is for the people of Ontario, and we won't rest until the job is done, Mr. Speaker.
The next question, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Speaker. My next question is also for the Premier, but I have to say it's pretty shocking that the President of the Treasury Board doesn't know the hundreds of millions of dollars they gave away in tax breaks to the rich. That's pretty serious stuff, Speaker. The Premier's gone from ripping up contracts, however, now to dictating contracts. Can the Premier explain to the woman driving a school bus in Etobicoke for $30,000 a year why she has to forego salary increases that keep up with the cost of living, while someone like Ian Todd, the Premier's former campaign tour director, gets a 25% pay hike and is making $350,000 a year to work for the Ford government?
Questions to the Premier. Opposition come to order.
Well, maybe the Leader of the Opposition should explain to the bus driver in Etobicoke 15 years that the NDP supported the Liberals spending $15 billion, putting us in debt to $347 billion. But I can tell you one thing, Mr. Speaker, that every single person is going to have a job. Every single person is going to have a pay increase. Every single person is going to have a great benefit plan, insurance plan, and we're going to make sure we take care of the people that need it most. We put in the lift tax credit to 1.3 million people, the lowest income people in the entire province. They're going to pay 0% tax. We're going to make sure that seniors get dental care that couldn't afford it before. We put $90 million into that. We made sure we take care of families that want to send their kids to daycare. They're going to have tax credits ranging everywhere from $3,250 as high as over $10,000. We're taking care of the people.
Thank you. Thank you. The supplementary question.
Well, Speaker, Ian Todd's just one example. When it comes to the Premier's friends and Conservative connections, a seat on the Ford gravy train with six-figure salaries and hefty pay packages are par for the course. But a working woman who spends her day travelling from neighbourhood to neighbourhood to provide home care is being told that $32,000 a year she earns is too much. Why is the Premier asking that personal support worker to tighten her belt while he's handing former PC Party President Ruben Devlin a $375,000 a year consulting job?
Premier.
President of the Treasury.
Refer to the President of the Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me remind the Leader of the Opposition and all the people watching around the province that when we campaigned on providing tax relief to the hard-working individuals and families of this province, Mr. Speaker. Tick that box. We campaigned on a commitment to preserve frontline workers so that they could deliver the frontline programs and services that the people of Ontario expect. We said we would do it in a way that's sustainable because, as the Premier said, we inherited the largest subnational debt in the world. We inherited a $15 billion deficit, Mr. Speaker, but we also committed to the people that we would protect what matters most. So we're putting more money, $1.3 billion, into the health care portfolio. We're putting $700 million into education. We are going to do what's right for the people of Ontario, and we will rest until the job is done.
The final supplementary.
Well, we all know what the Financial Accountability Officer says about that, Speaker. $2.7 billion removed from healthcare. But nonetheless, the Premier is asking families to expect less from government. Less teachers in schools, less funding for hospitals, and regular conflict with municipalities. And telling the women and men who make our province work that they also have to accept less. Yet the Premier is more than willing to spend on his pet priorities, whether it's jobs for his friends, tax cuts for his political donors, or hundreds of millions of dollars in his beer store boondoggle. Why is the Premier telling the women and men who teach our kids, care for our seniors, and help keep us all safe that he can't afford to deal with them fairly?
The question's been referred to the President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again through you to the Leader of the Opposition. I'd put this to the Leader of the Opposition. Does she think it's unreasonable to protect a frontline worker's job? Does she think it's unreasonable to give that person a 3% increase over 3 years? Does she think it's unreasonable to support those families who rely on our health care system? And by the way, our health care system, does she think it's unreasonable to put $1.7 billion into 15,000 long-term care beds? Does she think it's unreasonable to put $1.9 billion into mental health and addiction? Does she think it's unreasonable to put $27 billion in capital and repairs for a hospital, Mr. Speaker? I put it to the Leader. Is that being unreasonable to the people of Ontario?
Members, please take their seats. Order. Start the clock. The next question, the member for Essex.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Speaker, in an almost unprecedented move, yesterday the Premier announced that this legislature, the People's House, won't sit again until after the federal election, almost 5 months from today. Now, we know that the Premier is desperate to help his Conservative buddies in Ottawa. He's even been spending millions of taxpayer dollars on ads to help them. Speaker, he's even fining gas stations $10,000 a day if they fail to display his partisan campaign stickers. Speaker, can the Premier tell us whether he's taking this 5-month vacation because he plans to campaign for the Conservatives, or is it because the one thing that Andrew Scheer desperately needs to shore up falling poll numbers is for the people to see much, much less of this Premier?
Members, take their seats. The question is to the Premier.
Minister of Economic Development.
Referred to the Minister of Economic Cooperation and Trade.
Well, I'll take
Opposition come forward.
this question any day of the week as the government House Leader, Mr. Speaker, because it has been an unbelievable year here in Ontario. We have accomplished so many things. You know, I'm hoping, Mr. Speaker, that after question period this morning that we will work together to pass 2 more bills in this legislature, which would bring the grand total to 20 bills passed by this Ontario government over the last year since we've been government. We worked throughout the summer last year, Mr. Speaker. We got a lot accomplished, removing the red tape that the Liberals brought in, starting to unwind some of the damaging, job-killing policies that Liberal government, with the help of the NDP, had implemented over the last 15 years, and getting our economy back on track, Mr. Speaker. We brought the legislature back before Christmas to look after some business. We've been hard at it with 11 bills passed during this winter and spring session, Mr. Speaker. We will not apologize for the work that this government has done.
Thank you. Stop the clock. Restart the clock. Next, or supplementary question, member for Essex again.
The Premier refusing to answer my question actually unequivocally answers my question, and I don't blame them for not wanting him to speak any longer. Speaker, over the past year, the Premier's lit an unprecedented number of political dumpster fires, most of which are still burning today, from ripping up the Charter of Rights to attacking decorated police veterans to getting chewed out by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Speaker, any reasonable person would say, you know, I should really try and clean up some of the mess that I made. Instead, this Premier is taking a 5-month vacation. Speaker, does the Premier feel he's earned a 5-month break, or is Andrew Scheer begging him to hide under a rock until the federal election is over? Which one is it?
Members take their seats. The question's been referred to the Government House Leader.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, I don't know, maybe the member opposite is going to be sitting back on his boat in Lake St. Clair, but we will be hard at it, Mr. Speaker, throughout the summer, continuing to bring in pro-jobs and pro-growth policies in Ontario that we will introduce in the fall, Mr. Speaker. Policies like the ones that have created 170,000 jobs since we became the government of Ontario. We will not apologize for that, Mr. Speaker. We passed 20 pieces of legislation, Mr. Speaker, putting money back into the pockets of the people of Ontario, something that we promised that we would do. The Minister of Health has made tremendous strides in eliminating hallway health care in Ontario, investing in long-term care beds. The Minister of Energy has done tremendous work at starting to chip away at the Liberal hydro mess, Mr. Speaker. We're continuing to fulfill our promises. You know, as of this week, we will have either fulfilled or are on the way to fulfilling 50 of the 59 election promises that we made, Mr. Speaker. We're not done yet. There's a lot more.
Thank you. Stop the clock. Order. Start the clock. The next question, the member for Oakville.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. It has been quite a year since last year's election, and our government's accomplishments to date underscore our steadfast commitment to the people of Ontario. After 15 years of lackluster leadership under the Liberals, Ontarians had enough. We ran on a platform that resonated with the people across the province. We committed to fighting Justin Trudeau's job-killing carbon tax with every tool at our disposal. We committed to supporting our frontline healthcare workers. We committed to reducing the regulatory burden for entrepreneurs and small business owners. Above all, Mr. Speaker, we committed to making life easier and more affordable for the people of Ontario. Can the Premier highlight some of the key achievements of our caucus has proudly accomplished in terms of protecting what matters most?
The opposition must come to order. The question has been put to the Premier. I recognize the Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank our incredible member from Oakville for the incredible work he does and the commitment he has to his constituents. Speaker, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We have an incredible team of all-stars here. We've taken action to create and protect jobs right across Ontario, 170,000 new private sector jobs. We passed the Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Act to make it life a little easier for small businesses that have been gouged for 15 years by the NDP and the Liberals. Yep. We invested $5.5 million, 5 years, in Killaloe sawmill to protect local jobs. We've created jobs through our investment in Highway 401, in Scarborough, and in Pickering, Mr. Speaker. We invested in Dryden's Community Improvement Program to bolster the economy right across the region. Mr. Speaker, I could go on and on about the great things we've done. Over 255.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Stop the clock. Order. We'll start the clock. Supplementary question.
Speaker, and thank you to the Premier for the answer. What's absolutely true is the former Ontario government, Liberal government, left Ontarians in the dark. Their lack of transparency eroded Ontarians' trust and confidence in Liberal leadership. The past decade has brought the highest taxes and the highest hydro rates this province has ever seen. But we've turned this around, Mr. Speaker. Our government has listened to the hardworking families of Ontario, and we've taken swift action to reverse the ineffective and burdensome policies of recent years. Budget 2019 reaffirms our priorities and commitments to protect what matters most: education, health care, and jobs. Speaker, could the Premier expand on our government's accomplishments to date? Thank you.
Again, the Premier to reply.
Well, through you, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for the great question. I'd also like to thank the incredible Minister of Health, Deputy Premier. I couldn't ask for a better Minister of Health or Deputy Premier for long-term care and her outstanding work on her file. We inherited a health care system on life support, Mr. Speaker, life support that people were waiting up to 6 hours in the hallways. We're going to fix hallway health care, Mr. Speaker. The investments we've made will make real difference for our province, Mr. Speaker. Last month, our government expanded cancer care treatment in Hamilton and invested in Brockville General Hospital expansion to end hallway health care. We've made historical investments in mental health and addiction, $3.8 billion. That's $3.8 billion, more than any other government in the history of Ontario. We passed People's Health Care Act.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Stop the clock. Stop the clock. I'm going to remind the House that when a speaker stands up, you have to sit down and your microphone's turned off. And in this case, I had to stop the clock because I couldn't hear what was being said either. Start the clock. The next question, the member for Hamilton West, Ancaster Dundas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Attorney General. The rule of law means that governments, and even I must remind the members across this one, should follow the law, just like every Ontarian is required to do on a daily basis. It's a basic principle of justice and how we function as a civil society. And, Speaker, it's a principle this Attorney General is sworn to uphold. So that's why it's so concerning that this government is ripping up contracts and ignoring the rule of law, all for beer. In fact, the Canadian American Bar Association wrote the Attorney General an urgent letter and said this government will, and I quote, undermine the rule of law. The Attorney General's job is to uphold the rule of law. Has she spoken to the Premier about these serious concerns?
The question is addressed to the Attorney General.
To the Minister of Finance.
Heard to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much. You know, Speaker, we continue to...
Okay, I'd ask the Minister of Finance to sit down. I apologize to interrupt. The rules of the House allow any minister to refer any question to another minister. And what they're doing is completely within the standing orders. Order. Minister of Finance to reply.
Speaker, I'll begin like I begin this answer all the time. Most people in the province of Ontario are not aware that the government does not own the beer store. It is not like LCBO that we do own and that great brand. The beer store is owned by 3 global multinationals. They were given a sweetheart deal by the Liberal government. They put profits, the Liberal government put profits ahead of people, a deal that's terrible for the consumers, a deal that's killing competition, a deal that's keeping prices high, and the deal that's stifling the craft brewers. Speaker, international companies understand our parliamentary system. They know a new government.
The supplementary question.
To the Attorney General, and clearly the Attorney General will not take responsibility for the severity of what she's doing. Again, all for beer. Our international reputation as a place to do business is going down in flames. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce say this legislation hurts Ontario's investment climate. The Canadian American Bar Association says this is an attempt to override the law of contracts. They don't mince words at all, Mr. Speaker. They warn this legislation will create uncertainty, risk upsetting a functioning legal system, and says there isn't precedent for ridiculous legislation like this in Canadian legal history. This plan is so reckless, it's now an international embarrassment. Why is the Attorney General willing to put Ontario down in the history books as ignoring the rule of law?
The question's been referred to the Minister of Finance.
So thank you again. For the member, international companies completely understand that in our parliamentary system, they know that a government isn't bound by legislation from a previous government. If that were the case, this afternoon we could pass a brand new piece of legislation that would disallow tax increases in Ontario for the rest of time. But we know that our governments don't work that way. Things simply don't work like that. On the international front, we have heard from Fitch, bond rating agency, just last week after they heard about our new legislation, and they gave our province an upgrade, their first upgrade in 8 years. That tells us, Speaker, that our plan is working, that our legislation is respected, and, Speaker, we will take no lessons on legislative procedure from that government.
Off the clock. Order. Start the clock. The next question is the member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Speaker, the Ring of Fire continues to be a project with enormous economic and social potential for all of Northern Ontario. Yet we have heard very little, Premier, from the government over the past year about this project. We do know the two First Nations communities, Webequie and Martin Falls, are engaged in environmental assessments related to community access roads in their communities. Speaker, in that the building up of infrastructure is so crucial to opening up the Ring of Fire, I'd like to ask the Premier where those environmental assessments are at, whether these roads will lead to the Ring of Fire, and finally, Speaker, when will we see shovels in the ground? Thank you.
Questions to the Premier.
Minister of Environment.
Referred to the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member from Thunder Bay, Superior North for his question. Mr. Speaker, the Ring of Fire, as we all know, presents enormous economic potential. Mr. Speaker, as the member mentioned, my colleague, the Minister of Energy, Northern Development, Mines and Indigenous Affairs is working with both the Webequie First Nations and the Martin First Nations in terms of the road that's required to make sure that we open up this fabulous resource. Mr. Speaker, it was just the other day that the Minister of Finance, who we also know is the member from Nipissing, was speaking to us about the critical importance of this resource, not just in the north, Mr. Speaker, but in the rest of the province. Hear, hear. Thousands of jobs, Mr. Speaker, tens of billions of dollars of economic activity. Mr. Speaker, just one engineering firm working on this project, $4 million a month, Mr. Speaker, of work being done, not just in the north, but for all of Ontario. So to the member, it is a high priority, and we are proceeding as you would to open up that opportunity.
Thank you. The supplementary question.
Thank you, Speaker. I think we do all understand how important infrastructure is to the key parts of opening up the Ring of Fire. It's crucial. But of equal importance is that partnership that you referenced between the government, business, and the affected First Nations. The Matawa First Nations are the communities most directly impacted by this major project. What I would like to know is, has the Premier or the ministers had the opportunity to sit down with all the Matawa Nation First Nation chiefs to discuss issues such as governance and ownership of the road infrastructure that will be needed to move the Ring of Fire forward?
Very good.
The Minister of the Environment.
Minister of Finance.
To the Minister of Finance.
Speaker, unlike the previous government, this government actually is sitting down with the First Nations and making great moves with respect to the Ring of Fire. I find it such a surprise from that former member, Minister of Northern Development Mines. We sat for 10 years. I recall the first time I flew to the Ring of Fire, there were 240 men and women working there, delineating the ore body, tents everywhere, drill rods. One company had spent $700 million. My fifth trip to the Ring of Fire, nothing. 5, 6 people left just to keep it alive. They lost faith in the Liberal government, who made nothing but promises, never had any intention of ever developing 1 inch in that Ring of Fire. We will deliver the $60 billion worth of ore that's trapped in the ground, and we will deliver those jobs to the people of Ontario.
Stop the clock. Order. The next question is the member for Mississauga Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care. Mr. Speaker, what an incredible year has it been. Our government has been hard at work this session to protect what matters most to the people of Ontario. We were elected on a promise to put Ontario's patients and healthcare workers first, end hallway healthcare, and fix our public healthcare system. That is why I am so proud that this legislature passed Bill 74, the People's Healthcare Act. This bill puts patients at the centre of care while addressing the pressures and challenges facing our healthcare system. Could the minister please explain to the members of this legislature how Bill 74 is transforming and modernizing our public healthcare system so that Ontario patients and their families can finally receive high-quality and timely care they rely on and deserve?
Questions to the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Mississauga Centre for the great question and for the wonderful work you're doing in your community on behalf of your constituents. We do take our promise to fix our healthcare system very seriously, Mr. Speaker. This was really started with the passage of the People's Healthcare Act earlier this year. This legislation is a key component of our government's plan to finally build a modern, sustainable, and integrated public healthcare system. We envision a public health care system that will allow healthcare providers to work as one coordinated team focused on patients and specific local needs. With the creation of Ontario Health Teams, patients will experience easy transitions from one healthcare provider to another. We are building a public health care system centred around the patient and redirecting money to frontline services where it belongs.
Supplementary question.
I thank the Minister for her response and her steadfast leadership on this file. Patients and healthcare professionals across Ontario will certainly benefit from an integrated and connected public healthcare system. Bill 74 is a key component of our government's plan to finally build a modern, sustainable and integrated public healthcare system, all of which the previous Liberal government failed to do. The creation of Ontario Health Teams is an integral part of our plan to center our healthcare system around the local needs of our patients. Could the minister please update the members of this legislature on the status of Ontario Health Teams and how these teams will help to transform and improve patients' experience and outcomes in Ontario?
Again, the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care.
Well, thank you again to the member for the question, and I'm very pleased to advise that we have received 150 self-assessments in the first wave of applications to become a local Ontario Health Team. These self-assessments were submitted by teams across the province from Kenora to Niagara and from Lanark County to Chatham-Kent. The response, needless to say, has been extremely positive. These applications represent a real commitment from healthcare service providers to work together with the province to deliver on the vision of an integrated healthcare system. Nice. A system where providers are encouraged and enabled to communicate directly with each other rather than working in silos, directly communicating only with the government. Together, we will finally build a coordinated healthcare system here in Ontario centred around patients, families and caregivers.
Thank you. The next question, the member for Davenport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a question for the Minister of Education. Speaker, the government's plan to jam kids into overcrowded classrooms will result in thousands of lost teaching positions, and it will also mean the loss of thousands of actual classes. Yesterday, the Globe and Mail reported that at the York District School Board, 124 courses are being cancelled for next year, and another 35 course sections are being cut. The cancellations include everything from media studies and financial accounting to manufacturing technology and calculus. On our last day together in this House for what seems like quite a few months, is the minister finally willing to accept that her cuts are ripping away opportunities from our kids?
Questions to the Minister of Education.
Well, Speaker, I have to say right back at you. Are you finally willing to accept the fact that we're putting student achievement first. And the fact of the matter is, no matter how much they flail around on the opposite side of the House, student achievement will remain our #1 priority. And I thank all the school boards across the province that are choosing to work with us. Because, again, when it comes to finding efficiencies, instead of turning a blind eye like this party is doing to the interest that we're paying on a daily basis, we all have to do our bit in terms of making sure the students that we're putting first actually have a future that they can have confidence in, because the government of today has taken care of the fiscal business that we inherited from that Liberal government. So long story short, we're putting student achievement first. We are working with school boards across.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I remind members to please make your comments through the chair. Supplementary question.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to say, I mean, this minister, I understand adjourning the House for 5 months so you don't have to answer any more questions about tough issues like this one. Students can't achieve if their courses are cut. Minister, you're cutting courses that students need to graduate. How are they supposed to achieve anything? This morning, I joined students, concerned parents, and education workers in my riding for a school walk-in against this government's cuts. One of over 260 schools holding rallies in the GTA alone this morning. These students are saying no to a plan that will leave them stacked in classrooms with fewer course options and fewer pathways to post-secondary. They are saying no to a plan that takes away their teachers and replaces them with untested, mandatory, online-only classes. Will the minister finally listen to them and stop these cuts?
Okay. I have repeatedly called order, and some of the members are ignoring the chair. When I call them to order, I'm going to have to start naming you individually, calling you to order individually, if this persists. Minister of Education, you reply.
Very much. And you know, I rise today very proud of the vision we have for education in this province. And you know, I'm proud of the people that are working with us to make sure we get education back on track. Hear, hear. Just yesterday, I met with 2 amazing students. They're grade 7 students, Meredith and Emma. And they came directly to meet with me because they're tired of the rhetoric. They're tired of the fear-mongering. And they wanted to speak directly to me. And I applaud them for taking that initiative. And do you know what else we're doing? We're working with our school boards. The member from Markham-Stouffville is working closely with the York board, and he knows the intent that they have. They're working diligently to make sure, just like we do on this side of the House, that they're putting student achievement first. And you know, I again thank the school boards across this province that are choosing to find 1, 2, 3, 4 cents on the dollar from within, so it doesn't affect frontline teachers and the learning environment in the school.
Thank you. Thank you. Order. The next question, the member for Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Speaker, we have all read stories about very low vacancy rates or bidding wars on single-family houses. In my riding of Richmond Hill, I hear stories every day about the need for more housing of all kinds. Speaker, government cannot address the housing crisis on its own, but we can make it easier to municipalities, non-profits and private firms to build new homes, and this is exactly what we are doing. Can the minister please explain how his plan will increase housing supply across Ontario?
The Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
Thanks, Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Richmond Hill for that great question. I want to thank her for all her work, both in the legislature and in her constituency. And I understand that yesterday, the member and her husband, Albert, celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary.
Speaker, as I said in this House many times, Ontario needs more housing. That's a fact. We had extensive consultations as part of our Housing Supply Action Plan. We had over 2,000 submissions, 85% of them coming from the general public, and it was through those consultations that we were able to take the best ideas, put them in legislation to get our housing back on track. In May, I was proud to release our More Homes, More Choice, Ontario's Housing Supply Action Plan, and the subsequent legislation. Our proposed changes will make costs more predictable for home buyers. They will make tremendous strides in terms of providing more supply, and I look forward to providing more details in the supplementary.
The supplementary question.
Thank you, Minister. Actually, everything that our government has done has really made the day for every home in my riding in Richmond Hill and across Ontario. And I thank the Minister for the answer that you just gave us. Speaker, I'm proud to be part of a government that takes the issue of housing and housing supply very seriously. This plan not only increases supply on market housing, but we're also reducing barriers for non-profits to build affordable housing and leveraging increasingly zoning what is most needed. Can the Minister please expand on how this legislation, if passed, will increase housing supply and choice for the people of Ontario, no matter their budget or needs are?
No question.
Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
Thanks, Speaker, and again, thanks to the member for that excellent question. Through our consultation, Speaker, we heard time and time again that we need to build more housing, especially affordable housing near major transit station areas. And Speaker, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're also leveraging the major assets and major investments that our government is building to build transit, making it easier for people to get to work every day. And Speaker, we also extended a development charge deferral for not-for-profits from 5 years to 20 years to help encourage more affordable housing developments. This was a suggestion that came to us as part of our consultations, and I want to thank Habitat for Humanity and other nonprofits for that suggestion. But finally, Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to thank my two parliamentary assistants, Christine Hogarth and Jim McInnell, for all of their work. Speaker, this was a tremendous team effort. We're so pleased to have this vote after question period, and I want to thank them for all their hard work.
Thank you very much. The next question, the member for Kiiwetinoong.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. The Skandaga First Nation has been under boil water advisory since February 1, 1995. That's over 20 years, Mr. Speaker. There are 13 First Nation communities with boil water advisories in my riding as of today. On Monday, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs said on my Twitter statement that the issue of beer bill versus access to clean water issue was unfortunate comment. Mr. Speaker, it's these kind of comments that are very unfortunate. I vow to continue to advocate for the people in Kiiwetinoong. Will the Premier direct his minister to apologize for his unfortunate comment to the people of Kiiwetinoong who do not have safe drinking water? Miigwech.
A look to the Deputy Premier. Referred to the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks.
Mr. Speaker, through you to the member. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister of Indigenous Affairs, Mining, Energy and Northern Resources has a deep and abiding understanding of the issues both of the North and of Indigenous peoples. His own background, as the member opposite knows, includes spending 7 years as a nurse, spending time in remote communities and remote Indigenous communities. Mr. Speaker, the issue of clean drinking water is a priority for this government, not just on reserve, but elsewhere. And Mr. Speaker, it is critical that we face it. But we face it, in reality, we face it with our federal partners. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we have focused on working with the federal government, in addition to our government, in terms of meeting their responsibilities. And, Mr. Speaker, the minister will continue to fight to make sure that we have clean drinking water, that we have safe conditions from a health and safety point of view on those reserves, and, Mr. Speaker, that the federal government meets their obligations.
Thank you. Supplementary question.
Thank you, Speaker. It's not the same when you work there versus living there. In February 2019, I visited Skandaga. I was told that 16-year-old Cora Adlukan had died by suicide days before. It is unfortunate that she lived her whole life with no access to clean drinking water other than bottled water. Young people in the Skandiga do not trust safe drinking water when they go to places with clean running water. They continue to buy bottled water. We live in one of the wealthiest regions in the world, and unfortunately, 13 communities in the Kiwetinoong cannot drink the water. Access to clean water is a human right. Currently, my private member's bill on UNDRIP is before the committee, but being stalled from third reading by this government. Given the minister's comments, is he saying the government is not interested in upholding the human rights of Indigenous people? Yes or no?
Minister to reply.
Mr. Speaker, let me assure the member that this government and the Minister of Indigenous Affairs deeply share the concerns that the member has raised, and we appreciate the compassion with which he approaches this issue. Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to ensuring clean and safe drinking water, but again, Mr. Speaker, this is something we must work with our federal partners, work with the communities affected, and Mr. Speaker, we will continue to report to this House progress on that issue. Thank you.
Next question, the member for Scarborough, Agincourt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Education. Over the past few weeks, I have seen a disturbing pattern emerge in this House. I have noticed that certain members of the opposition have been spreading inaccuracies about teachers losing their jobs. I know the minister is committed to investing in education. And
I'm going to ask the member to withdraw his unparliamentary comment.
Withdraw.
And conclude your question.
I know the minister is committed to investing in education and has been clear about our government's commitment to keeping our frontline teachers employed. Can the minister clarify the situation and tell us how are we improving our education system?
The Minister of Education to reply.
Very much, and thank you to the member from Scarborough Agincourt for the wonderful job he's done over the past year. Your riding, so lucky to have you. Congratulations on your first anniversary. And Speaker, in terms of the question, I understand where the member's coming from. You know, time and time again, opposition members would stand up in this House, employ dramatic tactics and yell across the House about rhetoric and spread rhetoric and wrong information that has caused a lot of anxiety and confusion around this province. And, you know, I really applaud, again, Meredith and Emma coming to me directly yesterday to say they're tired of hearing the rhetoric, what is really happening. And that is what our job is all about. It's about ensuring students that we're getting education back on track. Student achievement is our #1 priority. And let me be clear, from London to Ottawa to Toronto,
Thank you very much. Thank you. Supplementary question.
I want to thank the minister for the great answer. I am so glad that she is working with our boards to protect our teachers and continue to ensure our students' successes. With focused investments, I know that our government can get education back on track in the province. However, I know that parents in my riding remain concerned about funding for our school boards and our education system. Could the minister please tell me more about her commitment to student successes and the manner in which our government is investing in our education system?
Mr. Minister to reply.
Member from Scarborough Agincourt, I appreciate his commitment to education just like the rest of our government. And I can tell you from London to Toronto to Ottawa, we're hearing school boards recall 100% of their teachers that the party opposite tried to fearmonger about. You know, just a few days ago, we heard from the Toronto Catholic District School Board, they're recalling 100% of their teachers. That is what I was saying earlier and all along. Let all the pieces of the puzzle come together, and everyone in this province will see we are committed to getting education back on track. We're investing $700 million more than the previous government, and overall, my budget for education this year is $24 billion, and we're investing in student transportation. We're increasing our investment in special education. We're increasing our investment in school repair.
Response?
Honestly, Speaker, I think across this province, people know that we are committed to making sure student achievement is our number one.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question, the member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Speaker, my question this morning is for the Minister of Health. Good morning, Minister. Speaker, they held a funeral on Monday in Windsor for 17-year-old Josh Sweenard. He died last week from a drug overdose. With the permission of Josh's family, those who attended the funeral were given a naloxone kit. In Peterborough this week, they had 13 overdoses in 72 hours. There's an opioid crisis in Hamilton, in Brantford, Toronto, the North, and for that matter, right across this entire province. Speaker, when will this government declare an opioid crisis, and when will they partner with more volunteer agencies so fewer lives are lost from drug overdoses in Ontario?
Questions addressed to the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much to the member for the question. I agree with you. We do have an opioid crisis in Ontario right now. We are taking it very, very seriously. We have what's one of the reasons why we undertook a study of the overdose treatment sites earlier this year, late last fall, and we came up with a project of creating 21 sites that would prevent overdoses to help people with naloxone, oxygen, whatever else people need if they come into the sites and are taking drugs and have an overdose. So that's one thing. Saving lives is very important because you can't do anything else if you don't save the life first of all. But secondly, we need to help people get into treatment as well. That's very important to me. It's important to the Premier. It's important to all of us in government, as I know it is to you as well. We want to make sure that we're going to be able to get people into the treatment that they need. That is why we've retrained the sites into consumption and treatment services sites. There are 15 that have already been appointed. We are reviewing another 6 applications, which we hope to have up and running very soon once we run it through the same criteria that each and every site has to apply for.
The supplementary question.
Minister, 21 sites is far from enough.
Not even close.
Statistics with our regional health unit in Windsor show we had 150 overdose trips to the ER last year. This year in January alone, we had 22. That's more than 3 times the number from last year. The health unit predicts these numbers will increase dramatically in the warmer summer months. Speaker, everyone knows we have an opioid crisis on our hands, and through you to the minister. How many more overdoses? How many more lives lost, lives like young Josh, before this government does the right thing and finally tackles this opioid crisis head-on?
Once again, the Minister of Health to reply.
Well, again, we take the opioid crisis very seriously, and we are tackling it head-on. We have created the 15 sites, 6 more are ready to come forward, but of course that's only part of the answer. We know that there are many people who are overdosing, not in overdose and consumption treatment sites, but in their own homes. We know that we need to do more. That is one of the reasons, among many others, that we've come forward, first of all, with the $3.8 billion over 10 years to deal with our mental health and addiction system, to create a comprehensive, organized, connected system, $1.9 billion provincially to match the $1.9 billion that's being advanced federally. We've also come forward with $174 million in new money this year to connect our mental health and addiction system. We know there's more we need to do on the addiction side. We have the rapid action organizations in hospitals to deal with addictions. We also need to have more detox beds. We need to have more housing. There's many approaches that need to be taken in order to deal with.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The next question, the member for Brantford Brant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Attorney General. As this sitting draws to a close, we can look back on this first year of Ontario's first government for the people. The people of Brantford Brant expected our government to follow through on our commitment to respect and support our frontline police officers in their daily duties to ensure the safety of our streets and neighbourhoods, and that's exactly what we did. Mr. Speaker, communities are safer because we fixed the Liberals' flawed Bill 175. Would the Attorney General please highlight the changes in the Comprehensive Ontario Police Services Act that will keep hardworking and law-abiding citizens safe? Thank you.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member from Brantford Brant for his question. When we were elected by the people, our government was facing many urgent problems caused by Liberal mismanagement and recklessness. But we set our priorities, and one of the first actions that we took was to pause the deeply flawed Bill 175 and take on the necessary work to fix it. To provide transparency and clarity to the people and the police, our legislation now clarifies the mandate of the Special Investigations Unit for the people and for the police. It focuses investigative resources where they are needed on criminal activity within a police oversight system that is transparent, fair, and effective. To provide accountability and restore trust in a system that had left the people and the police in the dark for far too long, our legislation now requires SIU investigations to conclude within 120 days.
Response.
Mr. Speaker, this is a government that will continue to respect the important work of the police and will stand up for public safety.
Answer question.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Attorney General for her response. Ontario's government for the people was elected with a mandate to improve public safety across this province and to provide the brave and dedicated men and women of our police services with the tools and resources they need to perform their duties safely and effectively. Mr. Speaker, could the Attorney General tell how this government is standing up for the safety of families and our women and men who serve and protect our province?
Thank you. The Attorney General again to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am proud to say that this legislation is central to our commitment to making Ontario safer and standing up for the victims and holding criminals accountable for their actions. Mr. Speaker, police deserve our gratitude and our respect, not our suspicion and scorn. That's why our government is providing police with the tools, resources, and support they need to do their jobs, often quietly and heroically. Our legislation is based on fairness and on respect for the profession of policing. Notably, we're giving the public the confidence that when they phone 911, a trained, accountable police officer will show up, something that was not guaranteed under the previous Liberal government legislation.
The next question, the member for Brampton East.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Every single day, I hear stories from folks in Brampton about how life is getting more unaffordable. For Bramptonians, one of the major expenses is car insurance, which for some families can cost more than their home mortgage. This puts families in a tough position because in our city, driving is not a luxury, it's a necessity. But this Conservative government is allowing car insurance premiums to get even more expensive, with some companies getting approvals for rate increases as high as 11.4%. Speaker, Ontario already pays the highest car insurance premiums in this country, despite being among the safest drivers. Why is this Conservative government approving increases to car insurance rates that will make life more unaffordable for millions of Ontarians?
Thank you. The question is to the Minister of Finance.
Well, Speaker, certainly we're putting drivers first by lowering costs, increasing consumer choice and increasing competition in the auto insurance market, but I cannot stand here and talk about insurance without once again, for the last time this session, thanking the member from Milton for his great, absolutely great work on the driver insurance file. You know, there are 10 million drivers in Ontario who expect us to do absolutely everything we can to ensure the auto insurance system is working for them. Our plan, Speaker, our plan that we introduced in the budget puts drivers first and makes Ontario's auto insurance system more accessible and more affordable, Speaker. Our driver care plan streamlines care, Speaker. This is what we presented in our budget. Unfortunately, the NDP did not join us in helping lower insurance rates.
The supplementary question.
Back to the minister. Let's look at the facts. This Conservative government has the power to fix our car insurance problems. But instead, this government has approved massive increases to insurance rates. In the first 4 months of 2019 alone, the government has increased insurance premiums as high as 11.4%. The Conservative government had the opportunity to finally end postal code discrimination in car insurance, but they refused. They had the opportunity to cap profits of car insurance companies, but they refused. And on top of it all, we have not seen any details of this government's car insurance scheme. Why is lowering car insurance rates not a priority for this Conservative government?
Exactly.
The Minister of Finance.
Well, Speaker, we certainly did have a priority on April 11th when we presented the budget, which included putting drivers first, the very act, Speaker. I will share a copy of the budget with the member, but we're proposing immediate solutions, Speaker, to make auto insurance system easier and more convenient. There's going to be electronic proof of insurance. You no longer need the pink slip inside your glove compartment. We've got options that will meet the driver's needs, options that are no longer available. We'll have the ability for insurance companies to offer more options from their side as well. But, Speaker, let's hear about the Putting Drivers First Act from the Canadian Automobile Association. They are pleased to see the 2019 provincial budget provides Ontario motorists greater choice around auto insurance so that coverage better suits their needs. The Insurance Bureau of Canada followed up by saying the multi-year plan to fix auto insurance is a win for consumers. I urge the member to read the budget.
Thank you. The next question, the member for Brampton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade.
Great, Minister.
Job creators across our province are in need of talent. Whether it be trucking companies or tech companies, there are job openings that needs to be filled. I know that companies in Brampton are constantly in search of skilled workers to contribute to their business. And I know that is why the Minister wrote to the Federal Immigration Minister requesting additional nominations through the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. Yet, instead of allocating the 1,000 additional nominees that Ontario requested, the federal government only provided 50.
Wow.
Could the minister outline for the House the importance of skilled immigrants to our economy and need of federal government to urgently approve these additional nominations?
Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade.
Well, thanks to my good friend, the member from Brampton, for that question this morning. The Minister of Children, Community and Social Services and I wrote to the federal minister to request additional nominations in the OINP program. The federal government talks a big game, Mr. Speaker, about creating jobs, so I have to say we were pretty surprised when our request was rejected. We need to bring talented people to Ontario to grow our economy and to create new opportunities for people already living in our communities, and we need additional spaces in the nominee program to do that. That's why we've sent another letter to Minister Hussein in Ottawa to let him know that because of his decision, we actually have to turn away applicants who have job offers, Mr. Speaker. These people want to come to Ontario, they want to contribute to our economy and build a better life. It's just a shame that Justin Trudeau and the federal Liberals won't let them, Speaker.
That concludes question period for today. A couple of members have informed me that they wish to raise a point of order. The House will come to order. Minister of Government and Consumer Services, first of all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of all MPPs who are given the privilege to serve in this esteemed House, I'd like to thank you and your team, the clerk's table, protocol, and the committee clerks, the Sergeant-Arms, and all of our legislative security, maintenance, cleaners, dining room staff, cafeteria, Hansard, the pages, all of the ministries, and the broader public services. We celebrate our first year and a full year that was a summer sitting, an additional winter sitting, and once-in-a-lifetime midnight sitting, and actually all of that transition to make the machinery of government serve the people of Ontario. Thank you to you all.
Thank you. I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you. Point of order, the member for Sudbury.
Thank you for the indulgence, Speaker. I rise on a point of order. I meant to do this earlier, but Braylin Guppy was working in my office during the introductions. I want to thank Braylin, one of the OLIP interns, for working in my office, the amazing work she's done. I've had many conversations with the member opposite, Parisam Muskoka, about what a fantastic intern she is and what a good reflection of the Ontario Legislative Intern Program she is, Speaker. Thank you.
Member for Ottawa South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Point of order. I would simply like to echo the minister's comments and thank you and all the staff of the Assembly for keeping us all together as a family, as dysfunctional as it may be sometimes. You keep us functional. I also want to say goodbye to my colleagues from Ottawa-Vanier and Ottawa-Orleans. And in the case of the member for Ottawa-Vanier, I simply want to say that she's raised the level of debate in this legislature. Her passion for justice and fairness and truth are evident, and I think she's elevated that debate.
Point of order, the member for Toronto St. Paul's.
Thank you, Speaker. I just want to wish everyone in the Assembly a safe and productive summer. I'd also like to take the opportunity to remind folks, since we won't be here, that on June 19th is World Sickle Cell Day, and we should all connect with sicklers in our communities across Ontario. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Guelph.
Mr. Speaker, I want to echo the thanks to all the Assembly staff, but a special shout-out and tribute to my seatmate, the member from Ottawa-Vanier, who has proven that two members from two different parties can sit next to each other in this House and have a collegial relationship and a friendship, and I will miss her.
Thank you. The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Speaker, on a point of order, I also want to rise to say it's been quite an interesting year. We've had to rely on the great work of many, many people across all of the buildings that encompass the Ontario Legislature, your staff, the clerk's table, the Hansard folks, and of course all of the people that work throughout this building and all of the other buildings, some of whom are not going to get the pay raise they expected with bargaining, but certainly we all respect their work.
Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise and to congratulate my OLIP intern, Nish Chankar, who was just recently selected as the top OLIP intern across the country for her presentation. So congratulations to Nish. And
thank you. The member for Nickel Belt.
Just a huge thank you to my OLIP intern, Clara Piasica, who taught me an awful lot during her weeks that she was with me. Merci beaucoup.
Member for St. Catharines is the last one.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've noticed some honourable guests up in the gallery, and are you going to welcome them? Thank you.
If I get a chance. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I want to ask members for their full attention as I introduce a very special group of guests in the chamber today. It's my most sincere honour to welcome a Canadian Armed Forces delegation led by Brigadier General Paul, Commander of the CAF 4th Division. I also want to recognize the presence of members of the Royal Canadian Navy. In particular, I wish to acknowledge Colonel R.G. Elms, retired, a decorated veteran with a distinguished military career, and they are joined by the Consuls General of France and the UK, symbolic of the Allied forces that led the D-Day landings 75 years ago today, in 1944, which we are commemorating today. Please join me in warmly welcoming these special guests. Next, I'm going to ask our pages to assemble. It is now time for us to acknowledge this great group of legislative pages. Our pages are hardworking, trustworthy, and smart. They are indispensable to all that goes on in this chamber, and we are indeed fortunate to have all of them here. Our pages will now go home, having made new friends with a better understanding of parliamentary democracy and with memories that will last them a lifetime. In the coming years, we know that each of them will continue their studies and, in time, contribute greatly to their communities, their province, and their country in important ways. And who knows? Maybe some of them will take their seats in this House as members or work as staff. We wish all of you well. I would like to ask all members now to join me in showing our appreciation for this outstanding group of legislative pages. We have a deferred vote on the motion for third reading of Bill 115, an act to amend the Liquor Control Act with respect to the termination of a specified agreement. Call in the members. This is a 5-minute bell. Will the members please take their seats? On June the 5th, 2019, Mr. Fedeli moved third reading of Bill 115, an act to amend the Liquor Control Act with respect to the termination of a specified agreement. All those in favour of the motion will please rise one at a time and be recognized by the clerk.
Mr. Fedeli.
Mr. Fedeli.
Mr. Walker.
Mr. Walker.
Mr. Smith Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Smith Bay of Quinte.
Ms. Thompson.
Ms. Thompson.
Mr. Bethlen Falvey.
Mr. Bethlen Falvey.
Mr. Ford.
Mr. Ford.
Ms. Elliott.
Ms. Elliott.
Mr. Urick.
Mr. Urick.
Ms. Mulrooney.
Ms. Mulrooney.
Ms. McLeod.
Ms. McLeod.
Mr. Clark.
Mr. Clark.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Mr. Hardeman.
Mr. Hardeman.
Mr. Tabolo.
Mr. Tabolo.
Mr. Pettipies.
Mr. Pettipies.
Mrs. Marteau.
Mrs. Marteau.
Mr. McDonnell.
Mr. McDonnell.
Mr. Bailey.
Mr. Bailey.
Mr. McNaught.
Mr. McNaught.
Ms. Fullerton.
Ms. Fullerton. Ms. Scott. Ms. Scott.
Mr. Cho, Scarborough North.
Mr. Cho, Scarborough North.
Mr. Phillips.
Mr. Phillips.
Mr. Miller, Perry, Samuskoka.
Mr. Miller, Perry, Samuskoka.
Mr. Lecce.
Mr. Lecce.
Mr. Coe.
Mr. Coe.
Mr. Downey.
Mr. Downey.
Mr. Gill.
Mr. Gill.
Mr. Cook.
Mr. Cook.
Mr. Calandra.
Mr. Calandra.
Ms. Surma.
Ms. Surma.
Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Parsons.
Ms. Skelly.
Ms. Skelly.
Mrs. Martin.
Mrs. Martin.
Ms. Triantafilopoulos.
Ms. Triantafilopoulos.
Mr. Sarkaria.
Mr. Sarkaria.
Mr. Ostroff.
Mr. Osterhoff.
Miss
Midas.
Miss Midas.
Ms. Midas.
Ms. Park.
Ms. Park.
Ms. McKenna.
Ms. McKenna.
Mr. Nichols.
Mr. Nichols.
Ms. Kusindova.
Ms. Kusindova.
Mr. Romano.
Mr. Romano.
Mr. Harris.
Mr. Harris.
Ms. Gamari.
Ms. Gamari.
Ms. Hogarth.
Ms. Hogarth.
Mrs.
Carahalios.
Mrs. Carahalios.
Mrs. Carahalios.
Mrs. Fee.
Mrs. Fee.
Mr. Cho Willowdale.
Mr. Cho Willowdale.
Mr. Crawford.
Mr. Crawford.
Ms. Kanji.
Ms. Kanji.
Mr. Pacini.
Mr. Pacini.
Mr. Cramp.
Mr. Cramp.
Mrs. Wise.
Mrs. Wise.
Mrs. Tangri.
Mrs. Tangri.
Mr. Anand.
Mr. Anand.
Mr. Rashid.
Mr. Rashid.
Mr. Sandu.
Mr. Sandu.
Mr. Bauman.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith. Mr. Bauman.
Mr. Guzzetto.
Mr. Guzzetto.
Ms. Dunlop.
Ms. Dunlop.
Mr. Kanapati.
Mr. Kanapathy.
Mr. Babikian.
Mr. Babikian.
Mr. Babber.
Mr. Babber.
Mr. Pang.
Mr. Pang.
Mr. Tanny Gaslin.
Mr. Tanny Gaslin.
Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Sabawi.
Mr. Sabawi.
All those opposed to the motion will please rise one at a time and be recognized by the clerk.
Ms. Shaw.
Ms. Shaw.
Madame Jelena.
Madame Jelena.
Mr. Tabbins.
Mr. Tabbins.
Ms. Singh Brampton Centre.
Ms. Singh Brampton Centre.
Mr. Vantoff.
Mr. Vantoff.
Ms. Shubisong.
Shubisong.
Ms. Horvath.
Ms. Horvath.
Mr. Natashak.
Mr. Natashak.
Ms. Fife.
Ms. Fife.
Ms. Sattler.
Ms. Sattler.
Ms. Begum.
Ms. Begum.
Mr. Mamakwa.
Mr. Mamakwa.
Mr. Yard.
Mr. Yard.
Ms. Carpoche.
Ms. Carpoche.
Ms. Shamanta.
Ms. Shamanta.
Ms. Lindo.
Ms. Lindo.
Ms. Armstrong.
Ms. Armstrong.
Ms. Stiles.
Ms. Stiles.
Mr. Kernahan.
Mr. Kernahan.
Mr. West.
Mr. West.
Mrs. Stevens.
Mrs. Stevens.
Mr. Gates.
Mr. Gates.
Mrs. Gretzky.
Mrs. Gretzky.
Ms. French.
Ms. French.
Mr. Miller, Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Mr. Miller, Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Mr. Singh, Brampton East.
Mr. Singh, Brampton East.
Ms. Andrews.
Ms. Andrews.
Mr. Hatfield.
Mr. Hatfield.
Ms. Taylor.
Ms. Taylor.
Ms. Burns McGowan.
Ms. Burns McGowan.
Mr. Arthur.
Mr. Arthur.
Mr. Bourguin.
Mr. Bourguin.
Ms. Bell.
Ms. Bell.
Mr. Glover.
Mr. Glover.
Ms. Morrison.
Ms. Morrison.
Mr. Rakosovic.
Mr. Rakosovic.
Mr. Harden.
Mr. Harden.
Ms. Monteith Farrell.
Ms. Monteith Farrell.
Mr. Hassan.
Mr. Hassan.
Mr. Fraser.
Mr. Fraser.
Ms. Wynn.
Ms. Wynn.
Mr. Coteau.
Mr. Coteau.
Mr. Gravel.
Mr. Gravel.
Ms. Hunter.
Ms. Hunter.
Mr. Schreiner.
Mr. Schreiner.
Mademoiselle Simard.
Mademoiselle Simard. The ayes are 68, the nays are 46.
The ayes being 68 and the nays being 46, I declare the motion carried.
Third reading of the bill, troisième lecture du projet de loi.
The bill be now passed and be entitled as in the motion. We have a deferred vote on the motion for third reading of Bill 108, an act to amend various statutes with respect to housing, other development, and various other matters. Call in the members. This is another 5-minute bill. On June the 4th, 2019, Mr. Clark moved third reading of Bill 108, an act to amend various statutes with respect to housing, other development, and various other matters. All those in favour of the motion will please rise one at a time and be recognized by the clerk.
Mr. Clark. Mr. Walker.
Mr. Walker.
Mr. Smith Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Smith Bay of Quinte.
Ms. Thompson.
Ms. Thompson.
Mr. Bethenfalvey.
Mr. Bethenfalvey.
Mr. Fidelli.
Mr. Fidelli.
Mr. Ford.
Mr. Ford.
Ms. Elliott.
Ms. Elliott.
Mr. Urick.
Mr. Urick.
Ms. Mulrooney.
Ms. Mulrooney.
Ms. McLeod.
Ms. McLeod.
Mr. Yakubuski.
Mr. Yakubuski.
Mr. Hardeman.
Mr. Hardeman.
Mr. Tabolo.
Mr. Tabolo.
Mr. Pettipies.
Mr. Pettipies.
Mrs. Marteau.
Mrs. Marteau.
Mr. McDonnell.
Mr. McDonnell.
Mr. Bailey.
Mr. Bailey.
Mr. McNaught.
Mr. McNaught.
Ms. Fullerton.
Ms. Fullerton.
Ms. Scott.
Ms. Scott.
Mr. Cho, Scarborough North.
Mr. Cho, Scarborough North.
Mr. Phillips.
Mr. Phillips.
Mr. Miller, Perry, Salmascoca.
Mr. Miller, Perry, Samuskoka.
Mr. Lecce.
Mr. Lecce.
Mr. Coe.
Mr. Coe.
Mr. Downey.
Mr. Downey.
Mr. Gill.
Mr. Gill.
Mr. Cook.
Mr. Cook.
Mr. Calandra.
Mr. Calandra.
Ms. Surma.
Ms. Surma.
Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Parcell.
Ms. Skelly.
Ms. Skelly.
Mrs. Martin.
Mrs. Martin.
Ms. Triantafilopoulos.
Mr. Anthopoulos.
Mr. Sarkaria.
Mr. Sarkaria.
Mr. Osterhoff.
Mr. Osterhoff.
Ms. Midas.
Ms. Midas.
Ms. Park.
Ms. Park.
Ms. McKenna.
Ms. McKenna.
Mr. Nichols.
Mr. Nichols.
Ms. Kusindova.
Ms. Kusindova.
Mr. Romano.
Mr. Romano.
Mr. Harris.
Mr. Harris.
Ms. Gamari.
Ms. Gamari.
Ms. Hogarth.
Ms. Hogarth.
Mrs. Carahalios.
Mrs. Carahalios.
Mrs. Fee.
Mrs. Fee.
Mr. Cho Willowdale.
Mr. Joe Willowdale.
Mr. Crawford.
Mr. Crawford.
Ms. Kanji.
Ms. Kanji.
Mr. Pacini.
Mr. Pacini.
Mr. Cramp.
Mr. Cramp.
Mrs. Y.
Mrs. Y.
Mrs. Tangi.
Mrs. Tangi.
Mr. Anand.
Mr. Anand.
Mr. Rashid.
Mr. Rashid.
Mr. Sandu.
Mr. Sandu.
Mr. Bauman.
Mr. Bauman.
Mr. Cazzetto.
Mr. Cazzetto.
Ms. Dunlop.
Ms. Dunlop.
Mr. Kanapati.
Mr. Kanapati.
Mr. Babikian.
Mr. Babikian.
Mr. Babber.
Mr. Babber.
Mr. Pang.
Mr. Pang.
Mr. Tanny Gaslin.
Mr. Tanigasu.
Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Sabawi.
Mr. Sabawi.
All those opposed to the motion will please rise one at a time and be recognized by the clerk.
Ms. Morrison.
Ms. Morrison.
Madame Jelena.
Madame Jelena.
Mr. Tabbins.
Mr. Tabbins.
Ms. Singh, Brampton Centre.
Ms. Singh, Brampton Centre.
Mr. Vantoff.
Mr. Vantoff.
Ms. Shubisong.
Mr. Shubisong.
Ms. Horvath.
Ms. Horvath.
Mr. Natashak.
Mr. Natashak.
Ms. Fife.
Ms. Fife.
Ms. Sattler.
Ms. Sattler.
Ms. Begum.
Ms. Begum.
Ms. Shaw.
Ms. Shaw.
Mr. Mamakwa.
Mr. Mamakwa.
Mr. Yard.
Mr. Yard.
Ms. Carpoche.
Ms. Carpoche.
Ms. Shermanta.
Ms. Shermanta.
Ms. Lindo.
Ms. Lindo.
Ms. Armstrong.
Ms. Armstrong.
Ms. Stiles.
Ms. Stiles.
Mr. Kernahan.
Mr. Kernahan.
Mr. West.
Mr. West.
Mrs. Stevens.
Mrs. Stevens.
Mr. Gates.
Mr. Gates.
Mrs. Gretzky.
Mrs. Gretzky.
Ms. French.
Ms. French.
Mr. Miller, Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Mr. Miller, Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Mr. Singh, Brampton East.
Mr. Singh, Brampton East.
Ms. Andrews.
Ms. Andrews.
Mr. Hatfield.
Mr. Hatfield.
Ms. Taylor.
Ms. Taylor.
Ms. Burns McGowan.
Burns McGowan.
Mr. Arthur.
Mr. Arthur.
Mr. Bourgouin.
Mr. Bourgouin.
Ms. Bell.
Ms. Bell.
Mr. Glover.
Mr. Glover.
Mr. Rakosovic.
Mr. Rakosovic.
Mr. Harden.
Mr. Harden.
Ms. Monteith Farrell.
Ms. Monteith Farrell.
Mr. Hassan.
Mr. Hassan.
Mr. Fraser.
Mr. Fraser.
Ms. Wynn.
Ms. Wynn.
Mr. Coteau.
Mr. Coteau.
Mr. Gravel.
Mr. Gravel.
Ms. Hunter.
Ms. Hunter.
Mr. Schreiner.
Mr. Schreiner.
Mademoiselle Samar.
Mademoiselle Samar. The ayes are 68, the nays are 46.
The ayes being 68 and the nays being 46, I declare the motion carried.
Third reading of the bill, troisième lecture du projet de loi.
Be it resolved that the bill do now pass and be entitled as in the motion. Order. Members will please take their seats. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, Her Honour awaits.
may be seated.
May it please your honour, the Legislative Assembly of the province has, at its present meetings thereof, passed certain bills to which, in the name and on behalf of the said Legislative Assembly, I respectfully request your honour's assent.
The following are the title of the bills to which your honour's assent is prayed. An act to amend the Highway Traffic Act and various other statutes in respect of transportation-related matters. Loi modifiant le Code de la route et diverses autres lois à l'égard des questions relatives au transport. An act to amend various statutes with respect to housing, other development, and various other matters. Loi modifiant diverses lois en ce qui concerne le logement, les autres aménagements et d'autres questions. An act to amend the Liquor Control Act with respect to the termination of a specified agreement. Loi modifiant la loi sur les alcools en ce qui concerne la résiliation d'un accord particulier. An act to amend the Ontario Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Loi modifiant la loi sur la Société de protection des animaux de l'Ontario. An act to revive Dundas Valley Masonic Hall, Inc. An act to revive 665395 Ontario Limited. An act to revive Good Fortune Corporation. An act to revive All Trade Quantities, Inc. An act respecting the United Church of Canada.
In the name of Her Majesty the Queen, Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor assents to these bills. Au nom de Sa Majesté, son honneur, la Lieutenant-Gouverneur sanctionne ces projets de loi.
Thank you. This House is recessed until 1 p.m.